Welcome to the Roost News, the place for all things volunteer. I am Lillian Lee, co-lead for the Roost News, and with me are Jina Ragland, Associate State Director for Nebraska, and we have Suzan DeCamp, the Volunteer State President and State Federal Volunteer for Nebraska. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we are or have a fantastic topic today. We're going to talk about Nebraska, Nebraska's legislature. And we know, or some of you may have known, and I had to think, oh, really? Nebraska is the only state in the nation that has a unicameral legislature. And I hope I said that right. Okay, great. We're going to come back and find out what Nebraska's advocates are doing. But before we get to that, I want to find out a little bit more about Jina and Suzan. Why work for AARP and why volunteer for AARP? If you all will share.
Thanks, Lillian, for having us today. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about me. I have had the privilege to be part of the AARP Nebraska team for about 7.5 years now. And prior to my time at AARP, I worked and advocated for physicians across the state of Nebraska through the Nebraska Medical Association. And prior to that, I worked mostly through the Nebraska Department of Insurance as the SHIP, or the State Health Insurance Program Director. And that program basically assists Medicare beneficiaries with their Medicare insurance benefits through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I've always had a passion for older adults, and much of the work I've done over my lifetime is focused on the issues that affect older Nebraskans. And through that respect and knowledge and working again through the Medicare program, our partnership with AARP continued to expand and grow. And from there, I was impressed with the work that AARP does. And when the position opened in the advocacy realm with AARP, I didn't hesitate to apply and was fortunate to obtain the position, and I haven't looked back. I love what I do, and each and every day brings me more and more blessings and joy in being able to make a difference in the lives of those 50 and older and their families. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Suzan.
Hey, thank you. Well, by profession, I am a registered and licensed abstractor and title insurance agent, and I own a small title insurance business. I joined AARP when I was 50, when I first could join because of the benefits. And I love that magazine, all of the things going on with AARP. I've always been an avid volunteer in many organizations and got involved in legislative committees and the legislature in some of those positions. And I had met the former volunteer president of AARP Nebraska through church. And we were talking about a position that would be coming open on our executive council for a federal issues coordinator volunteer. And so he asked me if I would like to apply for that when I moved to Omaha. We were living out in the rural Nebraska in the central of the state. And so when we moved to Omaha 8 years ago, we did connect, and I applied for that executive council position and got on. And from there, I just became so much more interested in all the different facets of AARP and how involved they are in so many things that are important to older people. So I had been working for about 7 years as a volunteer, and then the position for a volunteer president came open, and I applied for that. And so I am now the president of the state and enjoying every bit of it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, ladies, for your work as a employee and as your volunteer work. So we're going to sort of switch now back to Nebraska's legislature and the priorities and all those great things you all are doing in the state of Nebraska. Jina, tell us a little bit about the unicameral legislature. What's that?
Sure, Lillian. Yeah, thanks for the question. And this is the fun part. Nebraska is actually one of the only state legislatures in the nation, and actually the only one that is a single house. And so that's why we are called the unicameral. Again, we don't have the two houses per se that any other state has. We don't have the Senate side and the House side. We just have the one house, which is representatives of again, within our state. We weren't always the unicameral. However, in the past, the state did have a Senate and a House of Representatives, and that was for about 68 years before Nebraskans voted to get rid of half of the state legislature. So that happened in 1934.
Mm.
Again, we have one House of Legislatures, and then the other house per se is the people of the state of Nebraska. A lot of that point for doing that was, again, in 1937, there were government cuts and costs that were going on, and they were needing to change ways of the budget. And so the government cut those costs by, again, going with a specific unicameral. So we went from 133 in the bicameral to 43 in the new single house, which was nearly a 70% reduction. And just to give you a little bit of illustration of today, Nebraska's legislature is made up of 49 legislatures, and those each represent districts of about 40,000 constituents.
Wow, that's interesting. So with the cut in the number of representatives, have you seen a big difference in changes being made or issues being voted on?
Well, I think, and again, this dates back to 1937. So before my time, I don't really know anything different. But I do know there are some advantages of the unicameral and some disadvantages depending on who you talk to.
Right.
I think specifically the one man, one vote concept is really one of the advantages where, you know, you don't have the two separate houses you have to go through. But I think the biggest thing for us is the power of the people in the unicameral, that the public's voice is what's most important.
Yes.
And state senators are supposed to open up and listen to their constituents. Uniquely enough, every bill that's introduced in the legislature is given a public hearing. Not many other states do that. And here in a little bit, we'll talk about the number of bills that were introduced. But every one of those gets a public hearing, and that gives the public, anyone, citizens, lobbyists, groups, whoever has the opportunity to come before the legislature and voice their thoughts or opinion on a bill. And so again, I think that's really powerful when you give that power back to the people and their voices need to be heard.
Right. And that sort of ties into my next, I would say, question or feedback from Suzan. You are the lead advocate for state and federal. Now, with AARP being nonpartisan, what is Nebraska's overall goal, the AARP office in Nebraska? What's their overall goal? What are the priorities that they want their legislature to do in Nebraska addressing the 50+ population?
Sure. I guess I'll start by saying that the Nebraska legislature meets every year, but they operate on a biennium schedule. So the first biennium session is held in odd number years, and it's a long session consisting of 90 days. And then the second biennium session is held in even numbered years, and that is a short session of 60 days. Excuse me. So bills that are introduced and scheduled for debate during the long session, if they haven't been completed, they remain active and they're carried over to our next short session and scheduled for debate there. So then the next year, there are new bills introduced as well in the short session, in addition to all those carryover bills. So to put that into perspective, in 2023, we had a long session and there were over 800 bills introduced. And about half of those bills, about 400, carried over into the 2024 session. And in 2024, there have been another 600 new bills introduced. Yeah. So as Jina mentioned earlier, in our unicameral, every bill that's introduced is required to receive a public hearing. So this is a huge number of bills to wade through, especially in a short session of 60 days.
Yes.
So in AARP, Nebraska, we have staff and advocacy volunteers that read and review every single bill that's introduced. And then we work to sort through the bills by issue and organize them based on the AARP dashboard and non-dashboard criteria. We consider the level of impact it'll have and the importance to our population and determine then which bills will become priority for us. So as Jina mentioned earlier, our unicameral is nonpartisan. So members of the legislature are not elected on their political affiliation, but even though the body is nonpartisan, votes are often cast along party lines. So our unicameral consists of 49 senators. Like Jina said, 32 of them are Republican, 16 are Democrat, and 1 is nonpartisan. So due to the makeup of our legislature, we try to focus on issues that can be supported by both sides of the aisle. And typically we try to steer clear of the more contentious bills. So our priority issues, of course, like all the other states, are topics like caregiving, long-term care, healthcare, financial security, livable communities, and broadband connectivity. So just to give you an example of some of the bills that were priority for us this year during this session, we actually had two of our own bills introduced. One was a caregiver tax credit. And I'll just briefly mention, I know there's a lot involved in this, but it would be a tax credit that people could claim on their income tax return of up to $2,000 in one tax year, or up to $3,000 if the person they're giving care to is a veteran or has been diagnosed with dementia. And so that credit would be for 50% of the caregiver's qualified expenses. And then there are also income guidelines for the caregiver. So Nebraska has worked for years and years trying to get a little bit of movement on helping caregivers, because we all know how important that is. So in the past, we haven't had much success in even getting caregiver bills out of committee and onto the floor for debate. So we worked hard to convince the committee on the merits of the bill using personal stories from caregivers, and then appealing to the senator's own experiences with caregiving and how the issues affects or will affect most Nebraskans during their lifetime.
Right.
So this was one of the bills that we focused on during our lobby week also, which you'll hear about later, and how we tried to get our volunteers help to advance the bill. The bill was prioritized and did make it out of committee. However, in order to make that happen, there were several other bills related to tax credits that were amended onto this bill. One of those bills that was amended on is a more controversial bill, which will likely require overcoming a filibuster. And in our unicameral, a filibuster is you need 33 votes in order to pass it. So we're still holding out hope. It's actually on the agenda for today, and it probably won't be gotten to today. There are some other contentious bills ahead of it, but hopefully this week they will get to it. And if, like I say, we have success because we at least got it out of committee, but if we could get this bill passed, it would be such a huge win for our state. Because like I say, we have been trying for years just to make a little bit of movement on this. And we all know that even though it wouldn't provide nearly the amount of assistance that's needed, it would finally be a step in the right direction.
Well, Susan, I can see why you are the state and federal advocacy lead volunteer. That was wonderful. What a great overview. The other thing, well, first, before I get to your hybrid lobby week, I didn't hear you mention Social Security. Is your state or your AARP office focusing on Social Security? I know long-term, that's a goal for AARP.
Yes, we definitely are. And we have been, as a matter of fact, and I think Jina may talk about that a little bit later too.
Okay.
Last year, we were able to actually pass. We've been working on Social Security for the last several years, and we have been able to, we passed a bill that allowed a schedule whereby the Social Security income tax would be reduced annually up to a certain point. But last year we went in and were able to get legislation passed that completely does away with Nebraska income tax on Social Security benefits by this next year. So,
okay. Well, Jina, we'll switch back to you now. I know that Susan has her fingerprints all over this hybrid lobby week. But talk a little bit about your lobby week. What are the expectations for the advocates? How do you organize that? Because we have volunteers and staff listening from other states, and they may want to do something in the same format.
Sure. Thanks, Lillian. And yeah, we have been doing, obviously everybody does lobby day.
Sure.
And has done that for many years. Nebraska's always done that and followed suit. I guess the good old COVID or coronavirus, when it hit several years ago, kind of triggered for us to rethink how we were doing things. Clearly, we could no longer go to the Capitol. And so what began from there is where we've come today. It triggered a virtual meeting where I think that's nothing new to many other states. But we decided we were still going to lobby, but we had to figure out how to do it virtually. And so we, of course, used the Zoom platform, and that in itself took a lot of time and education and training for people to understand. And did that the first couple of years. And then last year, we switched to what we call a hybrid type of lobby week. And again, instead of one day, we now do this on a full week's basis. And basically, again, volunteers are given the opportunity, they can come in person or they can participate in lobby week via the hybrid option, which this year we did over the Microsoft Teams and have done that with Zoom in the past. I think what we have found is last year we did have a lot of people who stayed on the hybrid side. This year we still had people engaging that way in hybrid, but we started to see more people coming back to the table. The way that it's laid out, and again, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but I would say we've done this enough now that it's actually working quite well, in conjunction and help with our volunteer portal, which again,
very good portal, yay!
Yeah, portal. Many people are familiar with that, but we dump all of our materials out on the portal. And as we develop those materials and put them up there, we make sure people know that the opportunities out there and available. But we do offer, again, a week-long process where people can come in on a Monday. Monday afternoon is when we actually we start debriefing on the 3 issues or 2 or 3 issues, depending on how many we have that year, of what bills we're specifically going to work on. We talk about the 1-pager that we've developed with them. Again, we talk really in the weeds about the issue, who's the opposition, who supports it, who doesn't, that sort of thing. What are the talking points? And then we come back the second day and that's when we take the opportunity and head over to the Capitol. And again, we have many touches and opportunities where we engage with state senators. We go to their offices ahead of when the session starts that day and are dropping off packets we always take chocolates, cookies, something of that sort. And able to meet with them. Yeah, sometimes, and staff love candy, of course. Having that opportunity to visit with them. And then, of course, we go up to the rotunda where all the action's taking place. We sit in the balcony and be recognized with our volunteers there, where we're looking down on the state senators. Many times people are pulling senators off the floor and having those individual conversations. But the other unique part of what we do with our lobby week is the rest of the week, we do have some state senators who we have found we have better conversations and are more influential by scheduling virtual meetings with them the remainder of that week. So if we can't connect with them in their office and we can't connect with them in the rotunda, we have scheduled ahead of time, again, a 15-minute time period where we have volunteers from our lobby week that connect with our advocacy leads, who are the ones that lead those conversations with state senators. And they talk about the same issues, but we have them captive for that 15-minute time period. So again, you can kind of see there's a lot of things moving parts to this and going on, but we have found that it's been very beneficial, not only to our volunteers to choose their own path of what works for them. But I think the part that makes this very successful too, is we've been able to figure out which senators like to meet with us virtually, which senators like the in-person. Sometimes it's just catching them in the hallway and having those kind of conversations. But again, being flexible with our volunteers, with our state senators, that's been what's most successive. This session, we were able to meet with 78% of our senators during that week that we set aside. And that's pretty amazing, again, with everything that's going on and that sort of thing. Again, I want to tout, and Suzan can talk about this too, but our volunteer portal, with the help of our Ira Nathan, who kind of leads that in our state, and Robin Swanik, who's the staff person that provides that support. That's really where we have been most effective, because we put everything that anyone would need ahead of time for a lobby week up on our portal. And that is really where we send people. We do send them hard copies of the 1-pagers that we develop on the issues that we're talking about, but we really just point people to that portal to go in and look at things. And as we update them, we keep putting that information out there. Not only, again, as the portal where all of our advocacy information is, but they're going to find all the other stuff that we're doing in the state also. And so the first year was a little rocky because it was something new. But as we've developed that, now being our 3rd year of doing that, it's people know where to go. And that's been actually very beneficial. We're saving paper, but we're also giving them up-to-date information that they can go and access readily at any point in time on the portal.
Wonderful. Well, as a portal champion for North Carolina, I'm so excited that you all are using the portal. And I do know Ira, he's doing a great job with your portal support and your portal advice for the state of Nebraska. So thank you for that shout out. So volunteers and staff, She said it, the portal is important. So you give them these resources in the portal, but do they come together for any specific training prior to you giving them the resources? One of you talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I would say we do have our lead advocates, meaning one of those is Suzan. We do meet every Monday morning, usually an hour or two to kind of collect our thoughts for the week and figure out, especially during session, what's happening for that week, who needs to be where, who can do what, getting everybody on the same page of maybe what's happening on a bill and where we go with that. So we collect, and everybody, there's about 8 of us that meet virtually every Monday morning.
Okay.
We also meet every other week, hybrid, again, in person in different locations across the state, or virtually, again, if people can't come to the site, we bring our volunteers to the table and give them an update on things that are going on. So during the session, it's every other week we're meeting like that in that sort of form. So that's where people are getting that. We also have a weekly newsletter that we do through the Salesforce.
Okay.
And I have created that, and every Friday or every Saturday, depending on when the time allots, there is an update that is sent out to our volunteers through that Salesforce portal. Again, giving an update on what's happened in the legislature, what's coming up, what bills are out there. Here's the one pager. How do you make contact with your senator? We put media articles out there. So basically filling in the dates, the weeks in between when we aren't meeting either in person or hybrid, they're getting that newsletter, they're getting their calls to action and that sort of information. We also have 2 items I wanted to just speak about very briefly, but we do have a bill chart that we put out. It's actually an Excel spreadsheet, but we track all the bills that we are engaging on. Typically, as Suzan mentioned, there's about 1,400 bills going on at one time during each session, either as a carryover or new session. And so as we identify those, we put them onto our spreadsheet. And it really, that is the bill chart that gets updated on a daily basis, and it's uploaded to the portal so people can go out. There are links to the bills inside of there. It gives a status on where the bill is in the hearing process, on the floor, and the 3 levels of debate when it's passed. So it's out there. It's several pages long, but again, it's a great reference for volunteers who need to know what's going on. And then the other resource that I'm very proud of, and again, we have taken a lot of time to develop this, but we actually have an advocacy data book / handbook that we put together. And again, this was created specifically as a guidebook for volunteers. We update it every year, but mostly for new volunteers that are coming in. A lot of people are like, I don't really know how the legislature works. I don't know how to write a letter. I'm not sure how to email my senator. I don't know how to lobby somebody. So this book really gives some very basic ins and outs of what the legislature is. Again, how a bill is introduced, what's the process of that? How do you lobby? Again, how do you make contact with your senator? What's the do's and don'ts? And then the other side of the book, which again is probably my favorite part, is what we call the data book. In that portion, we take every state senator that we have in Nebraska, we have their photo. They have one page that's their page, list their district, their contact information, the biographical information, again, what committees they're in. And then at the bottom, we actually take a lot of the data that we have from the national office that puts into perspective how many volunteers or how many members, how many diversified populations, what's those numbers of members that are available or in their district. And we have used that actually quite a few times when talking with senators, when we're trying to convince them that, you know, this bill is important and will impact the people and your constituents. And this is why there's this many AARP members in your district. There's also a map in there that again shows kind of the layout of, you know, the district that the senator's representing. So there's a committee list. I mean, it's a one-stop shop that we put together. We reprint it, we update it every year, and then we provide that to our volunteers at the beginning of every session. We also, though, put it out on volunteer portal, and I believe that every state has access to everyone's materials out there. So again, if anyone's looking at that, I'd be happy to make contact and provide that copy to them as an example, but you can also find it out on our portal, specifically, again, under the advocacy side under Nebraska. So we have a lot of things out there.
Yes, you have a lot of resources for your volunteers. So that is very important. That's why you all are being successful, is because of your resources and your volunteers' commitment to your advocacy work. The other thing Jina, I noticed on Twitter, now X, that you were interviewed at the Nebraska Legislature. What was that about? Well, how are you advocating for the 50+ population during that interview?
Sure. So, we have the opportunity to go before the state Senate legislature on public committee hearings. And as we mentioned before, every bill that's introduced in the session is put up for a public hearing. And so again, once we've determined dashboard, non-dashboard, what's our priority, what's not, again, off of our spreadsheet, once we've done all of that, and then when the committee hearings are assigned, we figure out when we're going to be present in the chair before the committee's testifying, or whether it warrants we're going to do a letter to the committee and submit that online, or how we're going to go about making sure that we are on record about how we feel about that bill. I do a lot of the testimony, but I also would be remiss if I didn't give credit, especially to Suzan, our state president, who sits in the chair and actually provides public comment and testimony in front of state senators. So, I mean, I do that, but my goal when as an advocate, as state director, associate state director is to empower our volunteers. Suzan's background as an abstractor, she has sat in the chair in revenue and banking committee, and can speak very freely and very fluently on different bills that we are, working on because of her background professionally. And that brings much more value to the table, not only in the representation of ARP, but just in the bill that we're trying. And, again, Suzan oftentimes will bring to a light, a concern about something that maybe we weren't thinking of. And I believe our volunteers are respected in the body and at those public hearings. So again, I testify when need be, but I also, again, we always have volunteers who are willing to step up, and especially those that have that professional background. We also have a pharmacist who testifies on different bills on that, public health officials. We're very blessed with some of the public people and their professional background that they bring to the table. But again, that's always our goal, is to try and put those that represent those that we serve in the chair in front of the committees. And I do think we are very well respected in the legislature by doing so.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to quickly move on. I have another question that's sort of opposite. Great things that you're sharing about the state of Nebraska and its advocacy work. I always think about outcomes. Suzan, you all are doing such wonderful things. So are you at a point that you can say, oh man, what we're doing is wonderful, we don't need to change anything? Or have you said to your volunteers, okay, let's regroup, let's think about this area a little differently. What do we need to revamp on? Any words that you can share about what you're doing and where you want to go as it relates to outcomes?
I feel like we're making great progress in, enlisting lots of volunteers. Like Jina mentioned, we have that core group of about 8 advocacy leads who do a lot of our planning, visiting with members of Congress and state legislators. And then we also have that statewide advocacy group, which is quite a large group. And each year we get more, particularly when people join, they come to our lobby week and they decide this is a great thing to belong to. So then they will join our advocacy team. But we also bring some of our other volunteer groups across the state into advocacy. For example, we have community action teams, and we have a diversity team, and we always give reports at their meetings, providing them with updates on the legislative issues and what's going on. And I feel like, our unicameral we are a more conservative state. We are a red state. We have made some progress in working across the aisle and building relationships with our senators, and also building relationships with all members of Congress, trying to get them to understand our issues. And I feel like we are making progress in that area. And we're just continuing to focus on building relationships, and also to help give our volunteers the confidence that they need to feel comfortable in visiting with their elected officials, and to assure them that our voices are heard and that our voices collectively can make a difference.
Wonderful.
So I think we just continue to, and we have maybe in the last year or so decided we should maybe particularly target the more conservative audience and conservative members, AARP members, and we're making progress in that area. So I guess that's what I would say about that, Jina.
Great.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's great, Susan. And again, there are three big issues that, that we have worked on that have moved the needle in Nebraska, again, have been bipartisanly supported. Again, as Susan talked about earlier, is that removal of the tax on Social Security benefits.
mhm,
That
mhm.
took us about 10 years to do it. But
Okay.
every year we came back harder and heavier, and we're able to make waylay with some of the senators who have been opposed in the past. Again, this year with our caregiver tax credit bill, that's an issue that's becoming more and more bipartisanly
Mhm.
supported on both sides of the aisle. And then again, I think the other issue that Susan reminded me of earlier when we were talking about all this is our voter ID legislation.
Mhm.
That was a huge issue that came to light last year too that we had to be involved in, but we had to again work across the aisle. And so when we all put our heads together and we do that, it's the power of the numbers. We don't have a pack, but we do have the numbers. And I think that's the other thing that really always makes me smile when we get to the Capitol, when we show up in red.
Yes.
Lobbyists, senators, staff, people know who we are when we get there, when we show up in our red,
That's
because we have that
important.
power of the
Yes.
number. Um,
Yes.
and so I think that's really been very beneficial for us as we work. Again, sometimes it's harder to pass proposals here because it is a more conservative state,
Sure.
but we have been successful in doing that.
Wonderful. Well, you all have such massive activities going on with your volunteers and via advocacy for AARP. And I know that you all feel really great and that your volunteers have come on board and supported what you all are doing in both of your roles as staff and as leaders and as a leader. So we thank you again for that. Now we're going to begin to bring closure to the podcast. And as always, we always say, is there anything else you would like to share? Talking with the AARP volunteers and talking with the AARP staff, anything else you would like to share with them that may excite them about doing more for advocacy in their state?
I would just close, Lillian, and again, I will repeat a little bit of what I said earlier. Again, Nebraska is primarily a red dominated state. We have a lot of other states surrounding us in the Midwest that are similar to that. But we just continue to always be cognizant of the makeup of the body, and we work to try and remain as nonpartisan as possible.
Yes.
How can we work across the aisles? How can we critically think of, again, how does this strategically work with both sides, and remain bipartisan in the issues that we work on? But again, I think the other piece, and again, this is nothing new, I don't think, to anyone, but it really has made a difference here, is we work really closely to identify age-friendly advocates,
Yes.
caregiving advocates, broad advocates, again, who in the legislative body can champion and support our issues.
Yes.
Once we find them, we continue to work with them, and we can provide them support, but they also, build off that respect and knowledge and support in the body. And when they're respected in the body, obviously, then that's easier to move and pass things on. So
Right.
I think that's really a huge benefit for us as well.
Yes. Yes.
And I would just like to add, if I could, just quickly, I know we talked a little bit about our lobby week, but it may be, some people may want to use some of this information to build on their own lobbying efforts. And the hybrid we have is, so the people do come in person, and if they can't make it in person, they do virtual. But it's like 2 days in person, and then we go over to the Capitol, do a tour. They get to see where their senator's office is and meet their, the staff members, which is important. And then the next 2 days the advocacy leads have scheduled meetings, individual meetings with each senator, virtual meetings. And so we have 20 minutes of one-on-one with those senators. And so the constituents who are attending our advocacy week can get onto that Zoom and ask their questions and be a part of that meeting with their senator. And then the final day is just a brief, it's a debriefing, and that's all virtual. So again, that's where that hybrid comes in. And we would love to give anyone more information on our, example of lobby week if they just want to contact us. So
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Yes, that's what we're going to close with. Please reach out to Jina and reach out to Suzan. If you need more information, you can contact the AARP Nebraska State Office and ask for either of them. So we're going to thank you, staff and volunteers, for listening today. We hope that you will encourage your colleagues to listen to the Roots News podcast. Also, you may listen on your favorite audio platform. And again, thank you, Jina, and thank you, Suzan, for joining us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lillian.
Thank you,
Thank
Lillian.